Hi and welcome. My name is Lise Lønsmann, and I am so happy that you joined me here for this mini workshop around healing the fear of being seen. It is something that is very dear to my heart and something that I have struggled with a lot personally. It's something that often comes up with my clients in one-on-one sessions and in group work. It's very connected to some very primal fears in us. And I want to talk a little bit about today how this fear of being seen is connected to childhood trauma and how this can show up in our business, and also how we can begin to heal this deep fear. For those who don't know me, if you're new here, I am a somatic practitioner and a somatic inner child healing facilitator. As a somatic practitioner, I work with the body. So the body, everything comes from the body in my work. So somatic means from the body. And what I'm going to talk about today is also how this fear lives in our body and how we can start relating to it differently. Because what happens often for us is that we get stuck in, like, we spiral in our minds, right? We think about the fear and then the fear gets worse. And we think about how to fix the fear, and then that just makes the fear even worse. So some of the things I'm going to talk about today is how we can approach it from the body and how that can be really helpful, and how this can help us loosen parts of us that feel rigid and scared, and just start to release some of that tension, some of that stress, and start relating to the fear in a new way. Because I think that's really at the center of all of this, how we relate to our fear, how we're meeting the fear, and how we can support it, because that is what is going to help it shift, rather than us trying to make it go away or be less than it is. I will come back to that, but if you're thinking, am I in the right place? I just want to talk a little bit about who this is for. So I'm guessing that you are a hard-led, passionate woman, probably a spiritual entrepreneur or some sort of creative. Maybe you're an artist, a writer, a teacher, space holder, a healer, a change maker. These are often the women that I work with, women who really have a strong vision and a strong mission, something they really want to share with the world. But this fear of being seen in their work and as themselves is really holding them back. So I'm guessing that you fall somewhere in there. Hard-led spiritual entrepreneurs, passionate women. And I think for those who don't have this fear of being seen, they usually don't get it, and they think that it's about being nervous, or that it's a little bit like it's in your mind, it's something you're making up. And what I want to talk about today is also how this is really deep in our subconscious, and this is why it can feel so automatic, because it's not that we don't want to be in front of the camera. It's not that we don't want to be on stage. I mean, maybe we don't. Maybe there are more things going on. But what happens is that this fear, this freeze response, this no in the body of like, no, I can't do that. That is so automatic. So it's not like our rational mind. It's not like we're thinking, it's not a good plan for me to start a business. It's not a good next step for me to say yes to that speaking engagement, or it's not a good idea to be in front of the camera. Most of us are doing those things, but when we have to do them, this fear shows up, and it shows up very viscerally, very much in the body. It's very felt, and it often feels like there's nothing you can do about it. It often feels like this is just how I am. Like for years and years, I thought that this is just me. There's nothing I can do to fix it. And I'm talking about decades here, decades. All of my first business, this is my second business, my somatic practice. In my first business, I was terrified of being in front of anyone or anything. I was just, and again, I was doing it, but I was just so, I just couldn't, parts of me couldn't believe that it would be safe for me to be seen in this way, that it would be safe to be on camera like I am now, talking to you, saying, like, I'm just sharing the things that I know, hoping that they will help you, right? That's basically what we do as entrepreneurs. We share our knowledge and our tools, our insights, our wisdom, and we hope that we can support others. And often it's with something that we have gone through, tools that we wish that we had earlier in our journey. And I think it's just, there's something really powerful about how passionate we can be as women, of like, this is like, I know what I'm doing, this is what I want to do. And then how strong this fear is, because sometimes it's almost like the stronger the passion, the stronger the fear. And what is so helpful about somatics is also learning to hold those two at the same time, to be like, I can be terrified of being on stage and in front of my people, and I can also be really passionate about what it is that I'm talking about. So not to see fear as a problem of like, this is something I have to fix and make it go away, but actually allowing it to be there and be like, yeah, I actually feel both. I feel like a really strong passion, a really strong fire. And I also feel a really strong fear, a really strong freeze response of just like, nope, this is not happening. You can't do this. And learning to understand the relationship between the two, and learning to understand how we can soften it and let the two exist in the same space, and for it not to be rigid and not to be a problem, but allowing the fear to be in the room, allowing it to be part of your journey. I think that can shift so much for us. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. I'm just going to take a breath. Because as I'm talking about the fear, I can feel those old parts of me coming up, of like, yeah, this fear, this fear part of me is still present in me. I am working from a place as a somatic healer of inviting things in. That means that I have never worked on trying to make my fear go away. That has never been part of my intention in my own personal healing work, and it's never how I work with clients. That means that my fear still lives within me. It lives in a different place, and it lives, it used to be really closely connected to anxiety and panic, and it isn't anymore. It lives in a different place. It's softer, and it's easier for me to remind that fear part of who I am, and also where I am in time and space, because that fear part is an old part of me, a younger part of me, from a time where it wasn't actually safe to be seen. So it was actually a fact that if I was seen, that was not safe for me. That was not a safe thing to do. So I became very good at hiding, not being seen, not attracting attention, not getting up in front of people, not speaking up, not saying, speaking my truth, or saying like what was on my mind, because it just felt safer to hide in that way and to be more unseen. So a lot of my work has been slowly feeling safe to be more and more visible, both physically, to be seen like in front of the camera. And it's still not one of my favorite things, to be honest, but I can do it without panic, which is not a small thing compared to how it looked like a decade ago, for example. And I think this safety part is it's so core to what I'm talking about today, this healing the fear of being seen. It's really tapping into that safety that we didn't know when we were younger, and when this fear was this experience of fear was experienced by our body and by our nervous system, and how it became our reality is really important to now, where we are now in our lives as adults, to create that safety both in our lives but also in our bodies, and to feel the calm, to feel the groundedness, to feel safety in our own body, and to know that it can feel safe to be seen, even if people who are seeing you are disagreeing with you, or judging you, or even criticizing you. That's often what I hear from women entrepreneurs. They are very uncomfortable with being seen if there's a risk of being criticized, this feeling of being attacked just from getting up and talking about your work, talking about who you are, why you do what you do. This fear of people criticizing who you are, basically, and what you're here to do. That fear holds so many women back from doing their work. And this is part of healing the fear of being seen, learning to discern what is mine and what is theirs, how to be in your body and feel safe, even if someone from the outside is criticizing, or even being rude and being disrespectful, and to learn that inside my own boundaries, in my own body, I am still safe. That is such a big difference for your body, for your nervous system, for your body memory. I really truly believe that our body carries all of our memories. And if we remember a lot of feeling unsafe, that is going to come up whenever something reminds us of those stories and those situations. And I want to speak to that a little bit, just talking a little bit about childhood trauma and inner wounds, and how they can show up in our lives and in our business. So if you're here, I'm guessing that you already probably know at least a little bit about childhood trauma, or you're interested in learning more. So I'm not going to say too much about it today, just because I want to speak more specifically to the fear of being seen. So I'm going to try and make this short, which is not that I'm best at it. If you know me, you know that I'm a talker. But I think for a lot of us, before we learn about childhood trauma, before we understand what it is and understand how it has impacted us, a lot of us don't realize what trauma actually is, because for us growing up, it just looked like normal. It just looked like, sure, there was a lot of yelling, or sure, there was a lot of alcohol, or sure, there was a lot of physical violence, or whatever it was that was the childhood trauma. Because when we grow up in dysfunction like that, it doesn't look like dysfunction, and it doesn't look like trauma. It just looks like normal. It just looks like everyday life, because you're living in it. And what's important to understand is that when you grow up in that kind of dysfunction, it really impacts how you develop. It really impacts who you become as a person. And if you grow up in an environment that doesn't feel safe, then you're also gonna grow up with a lot of fear, because you have to constantly navigate, where is it actually safe for me to be physically? Like, is it safe for me to be in my own room? Is it safe for me to be in the living room with other people? Is it even safe for me to be around my family? Are there specific people who are not safe to be around? And when this is our reality growing up, then we also tend to become really hyper vigilant and be really looking out for all the dangers or possible dangers that could be out there. And if this is how we become wired, right? If this is all that our body remembers, this feeling of like everything is just unsafe, I have to all the time be very aware of what is going on, and I have to be ready to protect myself. I have to know when the next possible threat is coming. Because if that is our reality, then when as adults, then we continue that pattern, even if we have moved out of that environment and into hopefully a safer environment. But our body still remembers that feeling unsafe all the time. So then things that are actually not unsafe feels unsafe, and it's going to be really hard for us to discern what is safe and what is unsafe, because for us, our bottom line, the foundation, everything that we grew up with, our default is wildly unsafe. So we don't know how to tap into what is safe for us, and knowing when it's better for us to leave situations, for example, or to discern when something is maybe challenging. Let's say going on stage, speaking in front of people, it might feel challenging and it might feel new, but it's probably not unsafe. If it's in a safe environment with people you trust, it's probably not unsafe. But our body is going to tell us that it's a wildly unsafe thing to do, because if our childhood trauma is connected to feeling or being unsafe when we were seen, that is going to come up, and it's going to come up as a protection in the body of trying to protect us from the next threat. And I think, again, if you don't grow up with childhood trauma, you also don't understand that it's not only about when things happen, right? It's not only when the abuse happens, it's also the waiting in between for the next thing to happen. And this thing of waiting and always expecting the next attack, that has a lot to do with this wiring of learning that there's always something coming. There's always going to be a next time. And this can teach us as children that that's why I mentioned that, is it safe to be in your room? For some people, that was the safest thing, like to pull back from the family and then just stay in your own room. For other people, that was not the case. It completely depends on your situation and your story, right? But this could be one version of, it feels safer for me to go away from people and to be by myself, then at least I'm not seen and I'm not provoking any sort of aggression. And this, for example, is how the pattern of self-isolation as a coping mechanism is established by, this is what your body remembers as safe, is going away from people, closing the door, being on your own. This is how I deal with things. And then as an adult, when we have those patterns, when we come out into, society, life, we want to, co-create things with others, we want to live our life, then when there are situations that just remind us a tiny little bit of the unsafety that we grew up in, then our whole system can be activated, and we can be so dysregulated that we don't even, feel present in our body. This is also how anxiety can start, right? Of just disconnecting completely, and starting to feel like you're not in your body and like you're not safe. And this is why having some sort of somatic practice to help us ground into the body, to help us breathe, to help us just be present with what is can be so helpful. And at this point, I'm just going to look down at my notes, and I'm also going to invite you to take a breath, because when we're talking about childhood trauma, it's important to just check in with ourselves. Where am I? When Lisa is talking about this, how does it feel? Am I activated? Does it feel difficult to hear her talk about these things? Just for us to know and track, where am I in my journey? What feels okay to talk about and what feels overwhelming? Because what we don't want when we are working on our healing is to overwhelm the system. Because a big part of what our childhood trauma is rooted in is overwhelm, like too much, too fast, like, too much yelling, too much fighting, too much abuse, too much being attacked, too much being the target, just too much. And at the, all at the same time. And while we are tiny little people who are, not supposed to deal with those things. And that is wildly overwhelming, which is how our system ends up in our different trauma responses and coping mechanisms, because that's the only way we knew how to deal with that overwhelm. And this fear is one of those trauma responses of like being wildly overwhelmed. So now you have a really strong fear response, because that is going to keep you out of danger. That's what the system and your subconscious is trying to do, just to keep you out of danger. So it's just going to tell you, this is dangerous, stay away from this, and just hope that you listen to that fear, because those parts of us are still frozen in time and still try to protect us, because those parts of us think that we are still 5 years old in a situation where we can't remove ourselves or protect ourselves. And this is how this fear can show up when we're adults and show up in our business, because if we feel trapped or if we feel really exposed, then those fear responses can come up. And it's one thing of like how our thoughts can like spiral, and we can be like, oh, this doesn't feel good, or I don't like this, or I want to go off stage, like I don't want to be in the spotlight. But the response of the body is sometimes overwhelmingly strong, and this is because these are survival responses, right? And this our survival mode, like our drive to survive, that is the strongest drive we have in us, right? That is very primal. And that is what those parts of us want. They just want us to survive. It overrides everything. And if you're here listening, they have done their job, right? It's literally those parts want us to survive and stay alive. So the self-protection is to keep us alive. And I think it's just so important to remember that, because often when we look at fear, we can look at it from a perspective of like, I would like my fear to go away. And I think it's just so important that we meet the fear and acknowledge that that part of us is there for us. It's trying to help us with something, and to be in conversation with it. Because if it's ready to, make you so scared that you're going to freeze up in front of the camera, or stop breathing because you have to do public speaking, or induce an anxiety attack because the overwhelm is just too strong, then that kind of fear-driven behavior or way of being, right? That fear is going to drive your story, and that fear is going to drive your choices. If we instead can meet it and soften it, because that fear it's so rigid, right? It's so based in that frozen part of us that is just like, I just need you to stay alive. But if we can meet that part and be like, okay, listen, can we have a conversation about this? About what is it that that part is scared of? And to teach our bodies, you know what, there are different ways of being. And I have now learned to connect with different people and connect more with myself, to remove myself from things that aren't safe, and to just soften that part. So the fear also, that subconscious part of us also becomes open to a conversation, so that we are moving that fear part rather than trying to make it go away. But because that fear part, because it's survival based, you can't just push it down or push it to the side or make it go away. It can actually just make it a lot stronger, because that drive to survive is, as I said, the strongest part of us. So being in conversation and softening, that is such an important tool. And that's part of what I'm here to talk about today. So if you just only take one thing away from today, please let it be that being in relationship with, in conversation with, and softening the conversation in our world. That kind of, okay, let's just have a talk, almost like inviting the fear to sit down. Like, can we just sit down on the floor? Can we just like talk about, like, what is this thing? What is this, you know, what is this freezing up? What is this holding my breath? What is this clenching my fists? What is it? What is it that you need from me? Fear part, right? What is it? How can I support you? And just to listen to what are the needs. And as I see it, often the need is really to meet those parts of us with a lot of patience and a lot of compassion. So when they show up in our entrepreneurial life, they often show up as things that are really impractical for us, right? It can show up as procrastination, and then we become really just impatient of like, why am I procrastinating? Because I need to do these things. And the more impatient we become, the more that fear is going to pull us in the other direction and be like, yep, I'm going to keep procrastinating because again, I want you to survive. So yeah, procrastination is one, self-judgment is another. You know, if you just did an interview, or you just shared something, and then afterwards you're like, oh my goodness, did I just say that? That was just so stupid, or I shouldn't have said it this way, or why didn't I do this thing? Just being really hard on yourself. Again, this is a way for our fear to, if you feel bad about something, right? If you feel really bad about that interview, you might not do another one. So it's a way for the fear to be like, can you see how scary this is? Please stay away from it. And what's really important is that we meet ourselves with compassion, right? And go, oh, yeah, I did say that stupid thing. Maybe next time, can I make it into a joke? Or can I just explain that that wasn't what I meant? Or, you know, again, soften it so it isn't so black and white. When things are black and white, we are often in a trauma response. So if things are either the interview went really great or the interview was horrible and I'm really bad at this, that kind of black and white thinking is often when we are dysregulated and in a trauma response of like, oh, this is overwhelming, or this is not good enough, or this is really scary, whatever the trauma response is. So again, softening, meeting that in a way that feels gentle, and where there's space for it, where there's space for us to, you know, not do things perfectly. And that's the next thing I want to mention, perfectionism. This is another way that fear can show up, right? Where we can be like, this is just, it has to be exactly this way. Otherwise you can't be seen if you're not doing this exactly the right way. And again, it's a form of self-protection, right? Of like, if I'm doing this exactly the right way, everyone is gonna love me, which we all know is not the case, right? Everyone watching this is not gonna love this video. Everyone is not gonna be like, yes, it's the best thing I ever watched or listened to, right? That's just not reality. And if we have this really strong fear of being seen, it can be really hard to discern between what is the thing that I'm doing right now, the video, the teaching that people might not love, and then who am I? Where's the boundary? And just because people don't love or even like the thing I'm teaching or the thing I'm doing or the thing I'm saying, what does that mean about me as a person, right? If you have a really clear boundary there, you realize that it doesn't mean anything about you as a person. But if you grew up with any sort of childhood trauma that involved a lack of boundaries, which most childhood trauma does, it can be really hard to discern and feel where is that boundary. And for a lot of childhood trauma survivors who become entrepreneurs, we over identify with our work and we show up feeling like if I go on stage being seen and just one person criticizes me, it's me personally that they're criticizing, and this is about me. We can become very self-focused, and this is again a self-protection. This is the only way that we have learned how to stay safe or feel safe. So it's important to look at how this shows up in our business, because from the outside, it might look completely different. It might look like you are unwilling to go on stage, or you're procrastinating on those videos for months and months. Like, if you have a business partner, or if you're working with someone, a collaborator, they might be like, why don't you just do it? Why don't you just deliver those videos? Why don't you just, submit that application for that speaker gig? Why don't you just go on that podcast? Why don't you just do the thing? And that is it. That is, in my opinion, that is never the answer. It's never about just doing it. The whole pushing through your fear and do it anyway and step outside your comfort zone, that is just not at all the way I teach or hold space, and that's not my point of view. That's not what I believe in. I think, in my opinion, that's what people do because they don't know what else to do, which is completely valid because no one teaches us in the society we live in, right? So this is why it's so important to learn some tools that are based in the body and that are making us feel safe, rather than pushing through the fear and doing it anyways. Because sure, we can go on stage and short term it might work. We might be able to push through. We might be able to hold our breath and just speak through the fear that is in our body, but it's still there. And our body is still going to remember this experience of being on stage as a wildly fearful one. And this is what in time builds up unsafety and anxiety in our body, right, over time, because this is what it remembers. So this is why it's so important, in my opinion, to focus on creating safety, to, before we do these things that are scary, or even think about doing the things that feel scary, that we learn to build some safety in the body. So our body literally feels, okay, this is less scary than I thought. And so we have some experiences, some lived experiences where we can feel that this is safer than I thought. This doesn't feel terrifying. And it's just important to understand how that, because those terrifying feelings, if that's the level of your fear, that's a really strong impact. And it's just, I just hope that we can all learn to acknowledge the impact of fear and how it can really drive our choices, rather than shaming it and wanting it to go away. Like, be curious and be like, I wonder why this fear is here. I wonder what it has to tell me. Like, why is my fear present? Rather than being, this is so annoying, I'm going on stage in half an hour. Why is my fear here? Right? Because that, like, wanting to control is likely only going to make the fear worse. This is why it's so important to have, breathing practices, meditation practices, but also embodied practices that can really help you feel your body, feel yourself being present, really feel your life energy in your body, because those fear responses, those freeze responses, they are really going to stop all of that aliveness, all of the energy running through you. So that means that when we then walk on stage, we are literally walking on there with less energy and less flow because we're holding it all back. We are not breathing fully. We are not feeling free. We might tense up our muscles. We might clench our jaw. We're actually not free and relaxed as we would be if we were talking to, a friend or a group of friends somewhere where we felt safe and relaxed. And this is the difference. I'm not saying that it's not okay to be nervous before you go on stage, but there's a big difference between being nervous and having a deep trauma related fear of being seen. And yeah, if you're here because this is something that shows up in your business and stops you from doing things, I just want to say that it is something that is really possible to work on, and it really can shift. I am glad that I don't have any videos from 10 years ago. And at the same time, I am sure that if I had looked at them now, like the first few times I was on camera, I almost couldn't speak. It felt like an impossible thing to do because it just felt so wildly unsafe. And part of this was that I didn't know who was on the other side of the camera, right? And in the beginning, there was literally only going to be 10 people looking at it, right? So it wasn't that there were that many strangers, but my hypervigilance just, the fact that I couldn't control who were going to watch it and who were going to see me, who were going to potentially judge me, that felt like life and death. And this, again, if it feels like a life and death, that is a sign that it's a trauma response. And I wish I could go back and tell myself 10 years ago that that could be shifted, because it just, if any sort of business mentor or any kind of teacher in a course was like, yeah, then you just do this, you just record a video, I was like, oh my goodness. And I didn't share it, I didn't say anything, because others didn't seem to have a problem with doing videos. They might not be, great at it or professionals, but they weren't like showing up with resistance in the same way, where all of my body was just telling me to, like, don't do it. Don't get in front of that camera. And yeah, I wish I had had the tools that I have today, because I wasted a lot of time being stuck in that fear response, not knowing what it was, not knowing how to soften it. And yeah, it would have saved me a lot of time in my first business if I had known how to meet it, because there was definitely a lot of fear, a lot of freeze response, and a lot of rigidity in my first business. My body memory of fear is very visceral and very it goes very far back. So it still comes up. It still comes up. And as I say, I don't love being in front of the camera. So there are still like tiny reminders of like, do you remember a time when this wasn't safe? But yeah, having the somatic tools really makes all the difference. And it really has completely shifted how I'm showing up in my business, what I'm talking about, how I'm talking about it, who I'm talking about it to. And yeah, that's why I'm here today, because I really want to just share some of those tools. And I hesitate to call them steps, because it isn't a linear structure. Nothing in healing is linear, in my opinion. So I'm going to call them pillars, but I am going to just share a few pillars with you of like, this is how you can approach your fear of being seen, because we can talk about the fear all day, but unless we actually interact with it, check in with our body, try and track what's going on, try and relate to it, nothing is going to shift. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about those pillars, so you actually know, where can I do something myself, which steps can I take, which kind of action, what can make a difference. So let me move on to the 5 pillars that I call the medicine. And I call it the medicine because it's really, this fear can feel like it's not something that can be shifted or helped or treated. So for me, doing those things in these 5 pillars has really felt like medicine. And it's of course not, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a therapist or a psychologist. So it's not medicine in that way, but it's medicine for the soul and for the body. It really feels soothing and softening, which again, the younger me had no idea was actually possible. This is what I want to share with you today. And the overall intention of these pillars is to create movement in the body, both in the physical body. So to, like, rather than having the tension in the neck or the jaw or your shoulders, holding your breath, wherever your tension is, wherever your fear manifests physically in your body, to create movement in the body there, but also to create movement in your inner world of like how are you experiencing the moments of fear, what is present for you, and to allow that aliveness and that movement to help you shift out of fear rather than staying in that freeze response. So this is really about building capacity in the body and really slowly learning to hold that fear and give it a little bit more space and let it soften and let it be less rigid, and then again build a little bit more capacity so we can hold a little bit more and we can create more safety and we can manage when the fear comes up, and then we can also allow it to like just be a wave and still hold the space without panicking or without letting it take over. So the first pillar is resourcing, and this is really about supporting our body and teaching our body that there are good experiences, there are safe experiences, that we can feel supported. And resourcing can be anything that feels supportive to you, as long as it's done in a very embodied way. So rest is a big resource for all of us, one that we often don't do enough of. So if we haven't slept enough, our fear is probably going to be bigger because we're just going to be under resourced. So making sure that we are well rested, making sure that we're taking breaks, resting, listening to our body, that is one really big resource and one way of really making sure that we have more capacity for holding the big emotions that come up for us, including fear. Another thing is self-care, caring for yourself. It can be, taking a day off, doing the things you like to do, whatever self-care means for you. And I don't mean these fancy like commercial self-care things like, ooh, I'm taking a bubble bath. I mean, whatever makes you feel good. So maybe it's, reading a book or going for a walk or eating or drinking something specific. And these things can also be done unembodied, right? You can also walk in a really stressed way, then it's not resourcing, or reading a book to try and escape something. That is not really resourcing. So that's why I say it's very much about how you're being present with it, how you are embodying it. And as long as it's something that you're doing that feels like, this is filling me up, this is really good for me, this feels like what I need and what I want, that is something that is resourcing you. It can also be having fun, meeting up with friends, or just having a really good talk with one of your friends. Any sort of support. Therapy can be resourcing. Support groups, anything that creates meaning for you, anything that lights you up and you're like, yes, if you have kids, or hopefully your partner is resourcing for you, like hanging out with your partner, being like, you know what, just want time for the two of us, just want to connect and enjoy each other. That's also resourcing. Anything that allows you to drink in the moment and leaves you feeling more alive afterwards. And sometimes it can be hard if we are under resourced to find ways to resource, and that's why it's really important to start small. So it can also be like calling in memories of something helpful or supportive, like, oh, I really remember this birthday. It was a really good day. Let me just think about that for a moment, just to allow our body to be, in a different state. Because if you're in a difficult place, let's say your business is having financial trouble, right? And you're like, oh, how do I, this month wasn't very good, the last month wasn't very good, this wasn't what I expected, right? Then you can be stressed and maybe disconnected. And then it can be really important to bring in, oh, you know what? I remember the last time I was teaching this workshop, people really liked it. Again, it's about holding both, right? Holding like, yeah, the last 2 months were not, great months. I didn't, find the clients that I wanted to. I didn't, I had to cancel that workshop thing. Oh no. And then also to hold, oh, you know what? That workshop I did in December, I remember how people really loved it. And I remember these 2 people who said specifically this that really warmed my heart. So to hold those things, so the fear over here of like, oh my goodness, this is not good, can be held together with the like, oh, I also remember when I'm doing the things that are really meaningful to me. And just let those two influence each other. Sometimes we really tend to let the thing that is not feeling helpful or supportive or good for us, letting that take over, and maybe even try to make it go away, right? Let me try and make the financial stuff go away, rather than bringing in something that can make it feel a little bit less overwhelming. So learning to hold those two at the same time, that's a lot of what resourcing is about. So one, resourcing, helping yourself create aliveness and movement in your body and in your inner world. That is the first pillar. And as I said, this is really pillars, so it's not steps. It's not because you have to do one thing before the other. With that said, resourcing is always the first thing. Whenever there's an issue of anything, including this fear of being seen, the first thing is always to resource. So it's just because it's the first thing that softens. That's why we breathe. If we are in a situation and we're, the fear is coming up, it's helpful to breathe. Breathing is also resourcing. Focusing on your breath, grounding into your breath, that's definitely a really strong resource. Just wanted to take a breath there. That's what my body needed. Okay. Second pillar. This is about integrating embodiment practices into your life. So I think a lot of us can tend to be really good at structuring, like, this is when I'm going to yoga, this is when I'm going for a walk or for a run, this is when I'm doing this thing, because we live in, it's such a fast-paced world, right, that a lot of us, we really need to schedule things. And one of the things that can really shift our experience of fear is when we learn to integrate our embodiment practices into our everyday lives. So rather than only doing them when someone is teaching us, or when we're, on the mat doing yoga or whatever, breath work, whatever it is we're doing, rather than only doing it there, to actually weave it into our everyday lives. So while we're having a conversation with someone, noticing, how am I being present in my body or not? How can I maybe soften somehow? Can I breathe a little bit deeper? Can I do something to support myself a little bit better and to be more present in my body? If you know me, you know that one of my favorite somatic practices is slowing down. And this is something that can be really helpful to practice throughout your day. So noticing, when can it be helpful for me to slow down? Sometimes it can literally be the situation you're in. If you're doing your dishes, maybe you're really in your head and you're just thinking about things, maybe you're worrying and you're not actually being in your body. So to actually slow that down and be like, you know what, I'm gonna spend double the time doing the dishes because I'm gonna do it half as fast. I'm just going to slow down and really feel, how does this feel? How does the movement make my body feel? How is this affecting how I'm being present in my body? And if you struggle to be present in your body, struggle to like feel your feelings, struggle to be with the sensations of your body, you're going to find that practice really hard. You're going to be like impatient. You might be annoyed with me now as I'm saying it. You might be like, oh, I don't have time for slowing things down. And I know that so well. I used to live a very fast-paced life, very disconnected from my body, and I didn't have time for stuff like that. I also didn't feel most of what was going on in my body, which I didn't know at the time, because I figured that's just how I was, that's just how life was. And now I am wildly curious and find things like slowing down, doing the dishes, a really profound somatic tool and practice and experience. It doesn't mean that I always have time to do it, but it's the simplest things that work. And to slow down things that you usually do at a faster pace, that can actually be a pretty profound somatic experience, letting your body feel. I do it often when I walk. I like to walk, and allowing my body, so consciously shifting my pace, allowing my body to feel the shift and being like, I'm shifting this now. I'm not just mindlessly walking to wherever I'm going. I am consciously choosing to walk at this pace and just noticing, how does that feel? What does that shift mean, in my muscles? How does it feel in my feet, in my legs? What does it mean for, how are my emotions showing up? How are my thoughts showing up? Just noticing what we're noticing, because again, that creates movement within us rather than just going for one thing, to actually create that space of being like, you know what, I'm just going to do this differently. I'm just going to shift this a little bit. Again, it allows us to relate to things rather than just doing things automatically. We're actually relating to, this is my pace. This is my walk. This is how I do dishes. Just to like allow that relating can really help us tap into safety in the body. Just to notice, what does it feel like if I'm slowing this down? Are there like places in my body that feel safer? Are there less tension somewhere? Can I tap into that? If I'm taking a breath, is there a place in my body that feels relaxed and safe? Can I use that as a place to tap into, to feel what that feels like, rather than only feeling the fear? So to know, this is a place, maybe it's your hands, maybe being like, my hands feel pretty relaxed and safe. And to then allow that to be a tool. When the fear comes up, then to know, my hands often feel safe. They're often a safe, or at least maybe like a neutral place in my body where there isn't a lot of fear. And this is just an example. For you, it might be somewhere else in the body. But to know that, this feels safe or neutral while my heart is pounding and I'm struggling to breathe regularly because, or like normally, because there's so much fear in my system. So to know, hey, my hands are calmer, and to let that calm meet wherever it is that you don't feel that calm. And again, to just let the two things exist at the same time, to be like, okay, my breathing feels the fear, but my hands are calm. Letting those two things exist at the same time, and doing these practices throughout the day, and not only when things are bad, when we're like in a bad panic, but also when nothing is quote unquote wrong. But to check in with ourselves and let this be a part of our day. Just be like, you know what, in my lunch break, or, in my bio break, doesn't have to be long, doesn't always have to be like a 10-minute somatic practice. Sometimes it can just be like literally 30 seconds of just like, I'm just going to check in. How am I feeling? What is present? Is there something I can do to support myself in holding whatever is present? Maybe it's, a breath or two. Maybe it's a reminder of something, like, oh yeah, I feel that it is present, but I'm also having a bad day, so it's probably okay for it to be here if I remember to rest later today, or whatever is helpful for you, whatever the softening is, however you can meet it with softening, rather than the often like fixing mindset that we're in of like, how do I make this better, how do I make this go away? So again, it's about relating to ourselves, relating to our body, being with our body, that building that practice that can really help shift things. And you might be thinking, why are you talking about these things when we're talking about healing the fear of being seen? And this is exactly about this, that I don't go, as a somatic practitioner, I don't go directly to the fear. I start with building safety and building resource. And this is why the first two pillars that I'm mentioning is resourcing and integrating an embodied practice into your life, because it's important to start with the resourcing. Doesn't mean that, again, it's not linear and it's something we're coming back to, because resourcing is always important. But it's important to not go directly to the fear, because if we go to the fear and go like, hey, I need you to go away, I need me to not be scared when I'm going on stage, I need you to not hold me back from doing what I want to do in my business, that is likely just going to make the fear stronger. So this is why it's important to work around the fear and make the fear feel seen and heard and safe, so that it can start to soften, and we can be like, oh, is that something I can do to make you feel like you don't have to overwhelm me with this wildly overwhelming feeling of fear that stops me in my tracks. And this, the last thing I want to say about that practice, like something somatic in your everyday life, that also means that if fear shows up, it's important to know how to resource in that moment. If you're about to do something that feels scary, if you're stepping up, if you're doing something that's new for you, if you're taking a bigger risk than you usually do, if you're being really visible, right? If you're doing a workshop in front of 500 people, if you're, going on to do a TED talk, like how whatever big is for you, if it's bigger than what you usually do, the practice is to help you grow that capacity for that fear to soften. And one way of doing that is to really bring in that somatic practice in the moment, right? So to really let it be felt, and also allow yourself to do it, if it's in a meeting or if it's somewhere where people can see you, to just allow yourself to do it wherever you need to do it. It doesn't have to, you don't always have to explain what you're doing, right? You can also just take a breath, or even name it, like saying, I'm just going to take a breath because I feel like I just need to have a little bit more air in my lungs. Just practice those moments and like normalizing, bringing your body into the conversation. That can really, again, it can really soften and help us relate differently to the fear. The third pillar, and I love this one, is community support. Like finding like-minded people. Sometimes we think that we're alone with our fear, right? We think that, oh, it's just me who is, that's what I thought, right? In my first business, I was, I was younger and I was greener as an entrepreneur. And I was like, I guess it's just me struggling with this fear of being in front of the camera. It must just be something I'm struggling with. And the more women I work with, especially in like softer industries, as I said, I often work with spiritual entrepreneurs, healers, artists, writers. It's often people who have big emotions and who are working with big emotions, who are tapping into big emotions. And there's a lot of vulnerability in the work, and we can sometimes forget that that vulnerability can also be there in the process, right? That it can be very vulnerable to have a business. It can be really vulnerable to talk about your big mission and your big wisdom, because, what if no one likes it? What if no one listens? There are no guarantees in this world. And if we grew up feeling not heard, not seen, not even safe to be, then it can feel like such a stretch to be like, let me go on stage and tell you what I think about this thing. That can feel like, the worst choice in the world, which is then when the fear comes up, right? This is why it's so important to find a community of like-minded people. And this is why one of the reasons that I love women's work and women's circles, because I think our conditioning is just so different. And I don't think everything is gender-based, but I do think that women in particular are being really like judged harshly on, how they show up, how they are holding themselves. If they, there's often like an expectation that we have to have it all together, and we also have to show up. Like the conditioning is to not show up with the big emotions, right? To not show up vulnerably, but to show up and be in control and be on top, right? That is our conditioning. That is the patriarchal world we live in, right? That you need to win, you need to be in control. And I think this can make it really vulnerable for a lot of spiritual entrepreneurs, healers, facilitators to show up and speak about vulnerability, right? Today I'm speaking about softening, like softening the fear, connecting deeper with yourself. Some people are going to be like, hell no, I'm not going to soften. Like I need to fight. I need to fight to stay alive in this world, right? That's the reality for a lot of people. And I'm not showing up here with all the answers. I'm just showing up with the part that I know something about. And the biggest shift I have seen in my journey has been when I've been in community with like-minded people. It's so important to see others walk a similar journey to yours, to see that others are also struggling with things, to see that others are also needing support, stumbling along the way, and to normalize these things, and to just see that everything is a journey, and that it's about support and self-support and how we show up for ourselves, and how that can be so hard when we are trauma survivors, because no one, often, no one was there for us. No one taught us to be there for ourselves. So as adults, it's really hard to know how to do that. And that's often something we have to learn from scratch, which can be painful in itself as adults, which is why it's so important to have community, because it's so much easier to do things together than to do them alone. So that's the third pillar, community of like-minded people, someone who has the same intention, who are like, I'm here for this. This is, I'm here to heal the fear of being seen. I'm here to be more embodied as a spiritual entrepreneur. I'm here to support other women. I'm here to learn to support myself. If we have the same intention when we show up, we also co-create a space where we can shift, practice, make things happen. And that is such an important part of a healing journey. Again, this creates movement rather than us being stuck with our fear ourselves and being like, how do I do this? I guess I just have to push through and go in front of the camera, or go on stage, or do the thing I really don't want to do and just hold my breath and be scared. We can be like, hey, my community people, my sisters, can you help me? Can you just cheer me on? Can you remind me why it's less scary than I think? Can you share a story about how you did it and you learned something helpful, or whatever it is that you need as support, but actually being in a place where you can ask for that support, that makes the journey shorter, and it makes it easier, more easeful. And there's a lot to be said for that. The fourth pillar is finding one-on-one support. And when I say finding, this is also about finding the right one-on-one support. I think it's important to acknowledge that when we have deep inner wounds from our childhood trauma, not everything can be healed from reading a book or from being in support groups or being in conversation in groups. And I really believe that both the being in a group and having one-on-one support, that both of those things are really important, because it's different things that we are practicing. And the space being one-on-one with a professional, skilled healer that works trauma-informed and with somatic tools, that is such an important part of getting to the root of our wounds and understanding, like, where is that fear coming from, and learning to hold those stories differently. It's not all of our stories that we want to or need to share in community or with friends or with partners, right? Sometimes it's just helpful to have that, whether it's a therapist with some somatic training, whether it's a somatic practitioner like me or some of my colleagues, or some other sort of just professional trauma-informed helper, healer, whoever it is that is the right fit for you. That kind of time one-on-one and care one-on-one to really hold space for you and your journey can really help you untangle some of these knots of, like, oh my goodness, what is actually happening within me, to just like get the clarity and to not have to be stuck in those old stories, because our body remembers everything, right? So to just kind of allow ourselves to unravel some of that. And this is also why I love somatic therapy, because I have been in talk therapy, and I know lots of people who are or has been in talk therapy. And I think talk therapy is good for a lot of things, and it's sometimes really necessary. Sometimes it's also, we can hit a ceiling, so it can be really helpful to move into something that is less conversation based and more based in the body, more about feeling, more about holding your feelings, more about how you're relating to your body and what's happening in it. And in my opinion, that can be so helpful, rather than only staying in the mind and only talking about things, but actually allowing ourselves to connect with ourselves as bodies, and allowing our emotions to flow through us differently than when we're just talking about them and analyzing them. So just to recap, the first pillar is resourcing. The second one is having an integrated embodiment practice in your everyday life. Third one is finding community support. And the fourth one is finding one-on-one support. Again, this can create movement, right? Creating inner movement, creating less rigid thought patterns of how the stories were or why things happened. Just create more flexibility and understanding that things weren't necessarily black and white, and maybe there wasn't a good reason for the horrible things that happened. And just to learn to focus what is supportive for you right now, and for, like, how do I shift these things in my life? How do I focus on what I want to create? And as an entrepreneur, how do I shift these things so they don't hold me back in my business, but actually allow me to, like, how do I allow myself to create the things I want to create, with whatever fear is showing up for me. And this is the fifth and final pillar, which I've called rewriting your story. And by that, I mean practicing these things. Like, next time that there is fear showing up, the fear being seen in your work, and I suggest doing this when it's a smaller fear, not like one of the big ones, like not a TED Talk fear being seen, but a smaller fear. It's always helpful to start with the smaller things, like titrating, doing a little bit of fear before we go to the big fear. I really encourage you to practice. And the most important thing is practicing imperfectly. We are not going to get things right. We're not going to shift everything the way we want to and in that when we want to. We're not in control of things. This is a process, and healing has to move through the body. And sometimes, there are needs and patterns and things that we are not aware of, or that we don't, they might catch us off guard. And it's just important to allow space for that. So to allow yourself to practice in whatever small and with time bigger and bigger ways that feel good for you. So let's say it's practicing being on camera. It could be, for me, for example, I enjoy being on camera with someone else. So being in conversation with someone, being on a podcast or doing an interview, that feels a lot more supportive and brings up a lot less fear than having to speak in front of the camera on my own. So that to me is a way of softening that, of being like, oh, so if you're, going to do a bunch of videos, could you start with doing 2 that are with other people and people that that make you feel safe? So you're still being seen. It's still a lot of visibility, but it's almost like there's a buffer of like, I'm not doing this alone. This feels less scary because I have a friend with me. And if you're doing, like, let's say it's a speaking engagement, again, practice it in the smallest way. So just practice it in front of 3 people first, and doing all of these things, doing all of the somatic practices, maybe even on stage, like allowing it to be part of it. I think in general, just the more we humanize ourselves, we also help give permission to others, right? And be like, hey, I don't have to be the perfect speaker. I don't have to show up with no fear. I don't have to do things a specific way. I think we all live in such a performance-focused culture, right? Anyone can teach you anything, like to become good at all of these things. And sometimes I just think it's so important to allow ourselves to show up as who we are, right? And that in itself, I think, has a lot of value, and that permission giving in itself can teach others a lot, right? Like how you show up for your clients and for your students as an entrepreneur. That is really like being that role model of like, this is how I'm showing up, this is how I'm practicing this. I think there's a lot in that, and this, taking the small steps and allowing yourself to take them imperfectly, this is going to weave into your everyday life, and the steps and everything you're doing in your business. It's going to weave in more safety and more ways for you to feel safer, to be with the fear of being seen. In my opinion, this is not something that is going to go away like this. It's not going to be like, it's never going to come back, because every time you step up and expand as a person and in your business, then the fear is also going to come up again, right? Of like, oh, but now you're going to be seen in this specific way. Like if you're speaking specifically to something new, or if you're saying something that feels a little bit risky, or if you're in front of a lot of more people, that kind of visibility can still bring up your fear. I know for a lot of people, this fear of being seen, it can either be connected to this, that we've talked about, this fear of judgment and fear of criticism. It can also be connected to literally being seen physically as who you are, right? Being judged for your how you look, for your looks. Especially as a woman, this can be really hard in a culture that really objectifies us, right? It can also be about being seen as you, authentically you, right? With no filters, no mask, but just being seen as who you are, speaking your truth. That can feel very, very scary for a lot of us. So that kind of, having no filter, having no protection, but just showing up as who you are. Almost, there's some imposter syndrome in that, right? Like people finding out who you are, people reading your book and understanding, more about who you are and what your point of view is, who you are as a person. That can feel really, really vulnerable. And just practicing that slowly, like learning to be with that, learning to be with those things from our body, and learning to slowly build these somatic practices into our everyday lives, learning to have that support, learning to unravel these things. That, in my opinion, is the way to heal your fear of being seen, because we can do all sorts of things that are short term, like, work on our mindset. We can do all sorts of quick fixes, right? Of like 3 sessions of this, and then your fear is gone. And if it works, great. I'm not here to judge any other types of ways of working with this. But in my opinion, this is the sustainable way of doing this, the long-term sustainable way of healing the fear of being seen. It is resourcing, connecting deeper with yourself, and having a really embodied practice in your everyday life, living a life from your body, and then also calling in support from other women, other people in groups, and in one-on-one work, to really allow yourself that kind of support and care that you likely didn't have growing up. So really being cared for and really being supported, and then learning to implement all of this into your life. So with time, this just becomes how you are. You just check in with yourself. It's not something that you have to remind yourself of, and you just support yourself, because that's just how you are as a person. And you just find places where you are supported because that's just normal to you. And these things can be really difficult if you're a trauma survivor, because when we grow up and learn that the people who are supposed to support us, who are supposed to take care of us, didn't, and they weren't there for us, and we felt very alone, that alone, like the calling in the support, can feel very scary. Like, those of you who've been in therapy, this, like the first time you're going to a therapist, for most of us, that was like overwhelming, and probably happened with a lot of resistance, because it just wasn't a natural thing growing up. No one said, oh, I can see that you're not doing well, let's get you some support, right? It probably wasn't what the situation was like, because there was a lot of dysfunction and a lot of things that kept you from feeling safe and learning that it could be safe to be seen, right? There wasn't space for it to be safe for you to be seen. No one was concerned with how it felt for you to be seen. And this is why it's so important that we learn to build this into our lives. And as creatives, as entrepreneurs, as passionate women who are trying to provide a service for others, who are trying to co-create and hold space, it's really important to learn to understand these patterns and to start to unravel them, because it just makes such a difference. It makes such a difference for how we're showing up for ourselves, how we're showing up for the work we're doing, and how that makes us show up for other people. Like, the more capacity we have, the more we can be there for others, and also the more capacity we have, the more we can be there for ourselves. And it's really important to create a healthy relationship between the two, right? So we're not only showing up for others, but we're really also turning the care towards ourselves. And for me, this is a lot about what healing the fear of being seen is about: starting to take care of ourselves, rather than pushing ourselves to be productive and to be good entrepreneurs and to do things the right way, but to actually turn the care and tend to ourselves and be like, hey, like, to see this fear of being seen not as a problem that we have to solve, but as a symptom of something in our system. Like, hey, if this fear is showing up, and if it's showing up this strongly that it feels like it can literally feel like life and death, right? It feels like life and death to go on stage. Is there maybe something I'm not listening to? Is there something here that my body, that some part of me that knows something? Is there something here that I'm not listening to? And to have enough openness and humility to be like, I think there's something here that I can learn. I think there's something that part of me is trying to tell me. And when we're talking about the fear of being seen, that is often some story of like, that scared part, like, you are not seeing it, right? You are not seeing that scared part. You are not being gentle enough. You are not being supportive enough, not because you don't want to, not because you don't care about yourself, not because you haven't read all the books, or studied all the things, but because no one taught you from the beginning in your early life to take care of yourself. And learning that is so much harder when we have to rewire that as adults. And that's a practice. Like everything else, it's a practice. So learning to tend to that scared part of us, and just like you would tend if you were a loving mother, like you would tend to a scared child, right? How would you support it? How would you show up? What would you say and do? Again, you would likely soften, right? Create safe surroundings, sing softly, say calming words, repeat things that remind the child that it's safe and that it's not on them, that you are there to create and hold that safe space for them. And these things are very helpful for us. Again, these are things that can help us soften. Singing, literally singing, any softness, soft voice. Just like relating, it's self-relating, right? Relating to yourself in a way that you create safety in your own intimate space with yourself. In my opinion, that is what healing the fear of being seen is about. As you probably have learned by now, I can talk about this for days, but I'm going to land here. And I really hope this was helpful for you. I hope these 5 pillars is something that can be helpful for you, something that you can come back to. As I've said, these are not linear. Yes, resourcing always comes first. Like if you don't know what to do, resource. That's like the number 1 rule. But those are 5 pillars that we have to move between, right? Sometimes we need more community support. Sometimes we need more one-on-one support. Sometimes we just need rest. We literally just need to sleep. And sometimes we need more practice. Like if we're doing more things in our business, if we're trying to build something, then maybe we need to practice a little bit more, maybe with a little bit of more support, right? A little bit of more community support so we can better do the practice. So it's really about moving like between the pillars and finding out what is it that I need right now. Maybe I have a lot of one-on-one support, but I forgot to actually have a somatic practice because life just got busy, right? And maybe it's like, oh, I have a really good community support group, but I've been putting off finding a somatic therapist because whatever the reason, right? So just shifting between the pillars and just checking in with yourself, which support? So you're like almost like surrounded by the support and being like, which support am I drawing on now to continuously being this resourcing relationship with all of them and be like, how can I support them? How can they support myself? So again, it's about relating and creating movement and aliveness to soften the fear. Okay, I'm gonna land here. Feel free to ask me any questions. I'm here in emails and DMs and however you find me. Feel free to ask if anything is like, what were you talking about there? Or can you make another video about this? Or this really resonated, or I didn't understand this. Feel free to share. I really love hearing how this lands for you and hearing which parts that you want to hear more about, because this is, as I said, really close to my heart. And I think so many women entrepreneurs can really, it can really shift their work if they learn to work with this healing this fear of being seen. So that's my hope with this little mini workshop. So yeah, thank you so much for being here today, and honoring everything I've said today and being with the body. I just want to end on a little breath. Just taking a breath or two. Maybe you want to take it with me. Just noticing the body, how this all is landing, and knowing that you can always come back to all of this. You don't have to get it all today or do it all today. This is always something that we can come back to. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Take care.